These are the notes for Algebra 2, Section 6.6, Part 1 of 2. We're looking at radical equations. Now, a radical equation is basically an equation with the variable in the radicand. The radicand is that radical sign that we've seen before. So an example of a radical equation might be the square root of x equals, 2. Square root of x equals 2. Now, this is kind of a simple example, but we'll walk through how to do it. We have a few steps that we need to follow. In order to solve a radical equation, we follow steps 1, 2, and 3 here. The first step is to isolate the radical. That is, to get the radical on one side of the equation. Sometimes that's already been done for you. Sometimes it hasn't. If it hasn't, then you have to use regular algebraic manipulation, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, to get the square root or the third root or the fourth root or whatever you've got by itself. Then you can move on to step 2. And step 2 is to raise each side of the equation to the same power. And the power that you're going to raise it to will help you eliminate the radical and obtain a plain, normal equation. If you have a square root, you would raise it to the second power. If you have a third root, you would raise it to the third power. A fourth root, raise it to the fourth power, and so forth. Now, in our example here, you can see it's already been isolated, so I don't have to worry about that. But since I have the square root of x, I would raise it to the second power to cancel out the square roots. We've seen that we can take the square root to cancel out squaring. And we can take the third root to cancel out the third power and so forth. And it works the other way around. If I have a square root and I square it, they cancel each other out. So that's what happens. We cancel each of these out, and we get x equals the square root of 4. Or x equals 4, rather, not the square root of 4. Which leads us to our last step. Now, this example was a little simple, so we didn't really have to do much solving. But the last step would just be to solve the equation using whatever techniques we need. Some of these will require solving by factoring. Some of them will require some different ways of solving equations. So we'll get practice with those. For the most part, it will be fairly straightforward solving equations. Now let's look at some examples here. I'm going to start with this example. This one's not a super complicated one, but it's a little more complicated than the one we just saw. I have the square root of x plus 6 equals 3. Now my first step, of course, would be to isolate the radical on one side, which has been done. I have isolated this radical. Well, it was done for me, but whatever. So once I've done that, I can raise both sides to the same power. Now, of course, since this is the square root, I will square both sides. The square root squared cancels out, leaving me with x plus 6. So the radical and the power go away. On the other side, I have 3 squared, which equals 9. Now, this is a one-step equation. We subtract 6, we get x equals 3. And that's our answer. Done. Right? So again, not that much to it. There's just this one extra step of raising to a power to eliminate radicals. Other than that, it's standard solving equation stuff. We look at example 2. Now example 2 is a little more complicated in that we actually do have to isolate the variable, or the radical. So we start with the 2 times the cube root of x minus 3 equals 4. And our first job will be to isolate the radical. To isolate the radical, we would need to divide by 2. because 2 right now is multiplying this radical. So to get rid of the 2, we divide by 2, leaving us with the cube root of x minus 3. On the other side, I have 4 divided by 2, gives me 2. Now, my radical is isolated. And once my radical is isolated, I can raise it to a power. Since this is the third root, I want to raise it to the third power. And if I do it on one side, I got to do it on the other. Power and root cancel each other out. And ta-da, we're left with just x minus 3. On the other side, 2 to the third is 8. Again, another simple one-step equation at this point. Add 3, and x equals 11. Alright, we have one last example that we want to look at. This one is a little different because this time the equation is presented with rational exponents. And you remember, rational exponents are the exponents that are fractions. We've seen how we can convert from rational exponents to radicals. So we are going to need to draw on that bit of memory to get this done. Start by writing the problem. I need to write the problem. So 3x plus 4 raised to the 2/3 power equals 16. Now, I need to raise both sides to the same power. I don't have to isolate because, as you can see, this thing has already been isolated. I just need to get rid of that power. Now, dealing with rational exponents is a little different than dealing with radicals. We could, if we wanted to, convert it to a radical and deal with it from there, but that would be a little more complicated. Instead, we are just going to we are going to raise both sides of the equation to the reciprocal of this power. Remember, the reciprocal is where we take the fraction and flip it upside down. So instead of raising this to the 2/3, I'm going to raise it to the 3/2. That is the reciprocal of 2/3. And I do both sides raised to the 3/2. Now, of course, this is one of our exponent properties. We have a power raised to a power. Well, when we have a power raised to a power, we multiply the exponents. And if I multiply a fraction times its reciprocal, they cancel out. Magic. We are left with 3x plus 4 on one side, but on the other side we have 16 to the 3/2, which I want to convert to a square radical now. So I want to convert this. When I convert this, you may remember the bottom number is the root. The top number is what we're raising it to. So we have the square root, because the bottom number is 2, of 16 raised to the 3rd power. And we can simplify this. It's actually not that difficult to simplify. 3x plus 4 isn't changing at all. The square root of 16 is 4. 4 to the 3rd power is 64. Right? 4 to the 3rd power is 64. So, the square root of 16 to the 3rd power is 64. And we can solve this equation. Now, it's a two-step equation. Nothing new here. We subtract 4. We get 3x equals 64 minus 4 is 60. We divide by 3 to get x by itself. And we get x equals 20. And that is our solution.